So, Jessica Hooten Wilson and Father Nathan Carr from the Academy has they've agreed to talk with us for a few minutes about classical education. And so the first question we had for them was, what is it like starting a classical school? What does it take to, how can I start one where I live?
Yeah, I mean, we come from different experiences. He's much more experienced than I am. I will never forget, it was less than a few months after starting a school that I was at the Searcy Regional Retreat in Dallas. I mean, I think I had started a school in August. In November, I'm in this retreat, and they said, "Can you tell us how you started the school?" I'm like, we're 2 or 3 months in, so I don't know how it's going. So I'm not as experienced as Father Carr is with this. But for me, if you're going to do it, it has to be the Lord's will. So first and foremost, you have to start with prayer. You may wish that there was a school in your community, and that's a good inkling, and that's a good start to wanting to start a school. Those are good reasons. But if you're not praying about it, it's not going to come together the way that God desires it, and it's going to feel like you are fighting an uphill battle just all the time. I mean, without the resources or the strength I think you need to get through it. So I would say first prayer, and then just be ready for a long battle that there's not going to be an end.
A long slog.
It's a life. I mean, it's a life. You're entering a life. You're not just starting a project if you start a school. You're entering a certain kind of life commitment to helping something thrive and flourish. I don't know if that's fair.
That's totally fair. Thank you, Professor. Yeah, you're not wrong. The best. I think it's tempting to answer that question in some sort of list form. Like, you need your blueprints.
Yeah.
You need your pro forma and your projection. You need the policy handbook. You need one for the parents. You need one for the faculty, teachers, and that stuff's to some degree critical. But it is a life lived, and if you don't love, particularly in the classical and Christian context, if you don't love the church, if you don't love leading with culture first, if you don't love children, if you don't like the bumps and bruises of parenting in a way, and accountability, and conversation and community with others, then I don't know why you would ever do this. So there's this whole, I like that you mentioned there's a whole life commitment, and I think it's a way of life. I think it's a life lived. It comes through prayerful discernment. It's pure joy, but it's there's something very demanding about it that the list could deceptively lead you to think, oh, this is achievable.
Right.
You just want to make sure that you think beyond that list.
Well, I'm a really good project starter. And so, right? Which is where I thought I could just start a school. We needed one in our town. And so, I contacted Nate. I contacted a bunch of other people that were heads of school, chairs of boards. How do you do this? And you're right, the list is deceptive. So then you're like, okay, I need these many people. I need people who do graphic design, people who do fundraising. I need people who do curriculum development. And I will just get all the right people to the table, and then it's just going to happen. And then I can go do other things. That was my plan. And I think that if you're going to start a school, you just need to know that that plan is not going to work. You do need all the things we're talking about, which are very important. So email, so do the practical part of it. Email heads of school, email chairs where the board is foundational to the vision and are not just the money people, but they're actually helping the vision being carried through. Those are the kind of boards you want to talk to. Some of the most helpful information that I got, just practice. I'm thinking, for me, was we founded our board as couples, and I loved that arrangement. You did it a little different because you did the head of school thing, right, and then found the board. Is that the way you did it? And I started a board and then found a head of school.
Well, we actually did have
board
first
foundation.
Board.
Okay.
But we haven't had a board transition. You're not wrong. But keep going.
Right. Yeah.
Come back.
So for me, founding a board first before we found head of school, that was what we started with, and we did a board that was made up of couples. And I got that advice from Trinity Evangelical classical colleges or classical academies in Houston, and they said make sure that it's couples because it takes over your life. So, for example, when it's my husband and I on the board, and we are spending 3 or 4 hours every single week, and we're doing board retreats twice a year, it's not something else that takes me away from my family. It's a family thing that we're doing, that we are part of this. Our kids go to this school, we're throwing our lives into this. It's a shared ministry and not one that pulls us apart from one another. And that has been really helpful. And then I think even just from the parents and students and teachers who've come on to this vision, they've seen that it is a family thing in the way that even it's set up. It's not just individual projects, it's families that are running the board together, and that this is all parents need to be in on family as the starting point for education. So
yeah, that's really good. We started with
okay.
couples board, and this was before I happened to be headmaster. I was doing curriculum writing and development and a few other things, and then we moved later on
okay, to where you are now.
To where we are now. So there was a shift, but anyway.
Yeah.
What else?
What resources would you particularly recommend? So if you have, I write to you and say, I'm really interested in starting a classical school, but I'm not quite sure what that means. I know it's better than what my, this other option is, but where do I go for clarity on what classical education is as someone who's interested in following the model?
Or a felt board?
Oh, that'd be awesome.
A felt board. We can show you how to do this.
Straight out of my...
do you want to start with resources or me?
I'll throw a couple out, and
sure.
then please fill in where I've left off. The first thing I did, this was before there were really good website resources, and I'm kind of glad, was begin touring schools. So I toured one in Memphis, which was an ACCS school, Westminster, because it was an easy day's drive from Oklahoma City, where I founded a couple schools and campuses personally. My favorite school that I've ever toured is in Cleveland. It's called the Lyceum School. It's a Catholic trivium school it was a little older than my own movement, or the movement in which I find my own school. Like, they've just been doing trivium studies a little longer, and they're really good at that. So and the list goes on. Tour schools. Because you'll find things that you like, love, or indifferent to in each particular, and you want to create sort of your own ethos specific to you, right? So for us, what's the Academy way? And you can trace the Academy way at my own school from at least a dozen different schools. But now, to my earlier point, there are online resources that I love, and I would first go and read everything from the Society for Classical Learning and from the Circe Institute. And that should occupy you for about a year. I don't know, what else?
So you've mentioned a few threads. You mentioned Circe, which I would have mentioned, that's great. And SCL, you said ACCS as though people know what it is. So there's also the Association of Classical Christian Schools, and they have their own resources for what kind of school you want to create. Catholic. There's also Catholic resources for classical education. And then there's Hillsdale has the Barney Initiative if you're going to do charter. And that's one of the decisions you'd have to make, is whether you're going to go the nonprofit route or the charter route. Charter's going to have more government control, and so it controls a lot of your funding. But there's great programs through Great Hearts Academy if you want to go the charter route, or the Barney Charter Initiative. But if you want to go towards Christian, you can't have the government connection, and so you're going to have to be more of a tuition run or a fundraised school.
Good. So you've got a board, you've got some philosophical principles. How are you going to start staffing this thing? Where are you going to find personnel?
That's great. So it really depends on where you are. We have thankfully been in a town where a lot of people are great public school teachers. Most of them received their education. I'm in Salem Springs, Arkansas. I didn't even say, but most of them received their education from John Brown University, and so they received good Christian education. but some of them become moms, or they start families and they only want to teach part-time. And so our school was great. We were able to get all of these Christian public educators that we then trained in the classical education method and teach half-time. They loved the freedom of it, and then they also just loved the freedom to do their ideal version of what Christian education should be. And they didn't have that kind of freedom in the public schools. And so I've had teachers just, once we hired them and we started doing faculty training, and Nate actually came over and did some faculty training for us too, I mean, just in tears. This is what education should have been all along. I'm so thankful, you know. They just feel this kind of freedom. So I think most of the teachers that you can get, you're pulling them either from homeschool environments where they were already doing that, especially for the low. I would say for grammar school, this would be the case, right? For these kind of recruiting, is most of them are either homeschool moms who are excited about returning to the classroom and getting to specialize in one grade and one curriculum. And they're so excited about that, and so they can just focus on 4th grade, and their kid is in kindergarten, and their other kid is in 5th, and they get to specialize in 4th. Or they're going to be these public education teachers that are so thankful that they get to do education the way they always envisioned. We are actually moving into logic and rhetoric this next year, and that is a little bit more difficult to find teachers, just to be honest, because the teachers we want who know the trivium and know quadrivium, or that we can train in that even, you have to be more specialized. And so it's more difficult to find instructors at that level that you can afford and be able to pay them what they are worth. And so we're really struggling with that part of it and trying to find people who know Latin who could teach it in high school. There's just not the supply that you wish there was. And so it's more intentional. I'm doing lots of recruiting, having to pull in a lot of phone calls, call schools that teach Latin, tell me your best students, do they want a job? So it does take a lot of, I feel like a sports person where you're like, go and watch a game, like, please come to my school. Like, that's what I'm doing with all these Christian colleges. Like, you have a Latin class at your school. Give me your best student. I need one, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just a more intentional recruiting when you get into the upper school, I think.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, we've moved people from Boston, Seattle, Texas. I paid a lot of moving fees just to get people. Now, the past couple of years, and I'm in a larger city.
Yeah, helps.
I have seen a step. It's become a bit easier to recruit. Dialect and rhetoric, kind of middle school, high school. Sometimes we call it logic, rhetoric, 6th through 12th grade. We have found that as universities have had hiring freezes, and people with graduate degrees or postgraduate degrees who are exceptional teachers, professors, mentors, cannot find an immediate job, maybe in the places they first thought they might land, like in the university setting or even as an adjunct. We are only too happy to scoop them up, and I pay better than adjunct teaching.
I would say that too.
So we've shifted and started, I felt like we were recruiting this direction with our 6th through 12th. And then when I saw the market shift from that perspective, so I have some great teachers and professors who now feel that in fact God's will for them all along, of course, was in fact this calling. Like, this is so much better in whatever way that it's better, right? So that's been a one shift. Otherwise, your description of grammar school recruitment is spot on.
Yeah. But the upper school, and the difficult part, the good thing that you're scooping up these PhDs is a lot of times there's no room for them left at the academy because they're not able to teach the great books they want to teach, right? They don't get to teach, the Peloponnesian War or Shakespeare, or they don't get to teach that anymore. They're teaching freshman comp or introduction to history or something. And so they would rather be there and have a Socratic dialogue and get to have this classroom because that's how they imagined college education being. In the same way that grammar school, it's like, this is how I imagined Christian education would be. Now I can do it.
Yeah.
So now you have all these professors being like, I thought the classroom was going to be this, and now my kids are 15 and 16 instead of 20, but who cares? Right? Yeah. Like, it's still great.
In some ways, you skip some of the cynicism that you might otherwise. There's something, I don't know, still partially innocent at
and better relationships. You get to watch their sports games, you get to know their parents, you get to see them more often. I mean, I loved teaching high school at a classical school.
I better ask the last question before I fill out an application. This will be a kind of two-part. So, what's the thing in the process of starting it up that most nearly made you quit, and why didn't you?
That's a good question.
Don't even get me started. I love it, by the way, that we're being interviewed by a poet. Like, normally poets are the ones being interviewed. Like, tell me how art works. I still don't understand.
No, I think they tried interviewing a poet once, and that was it.
The
There was
poet
one
laureate
on that
of
side.
asking
Yeah.
questions about it.
There's something wrong. It's amazing.
Okay, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay. The thing that almost made I'm trying to think of how best to say it anonymously.
Uh-huh.
Right. There are villains out there. I'm just kidding.
Russell Moore calls it, well, might be a way to be vague because I'm talking about your experience. I'm giving you the language. But Russell Moore says there are trolls in every church.
Ooh, there you go.
You know, there are people, I think, you talked about the cynicism of students. There are going to be people everywhere full of good intentions who know better than you do.
That's really good.
And they're, at least I didn't know if that's what you were talking about, but I mean, I thought for me, it wasn't, I gave up in the process. I was excited, like we started this school, this thing's amazing. The problem is going to happen, I think it was someone at Hillsdale that said, you will have a crisis your first year. And that is completely true. I don't think the testing of whether you want to start a school happens before it starts. I think it happens the first or second year in, and you're like, why did I do this? That's when the testing happens. And for me, those hurdles came where we were already going, and people who signed on to the vision thought they had imagined a different way that it was going to happen. So they signed on with excitement about what we were doing, but they had a different vision of what it would look like in practice from what we were doing and what we had envisioned. And so they wanted something to look different. And then that was the challenge from within the school. Was yours
It's good
different?
language. No, that's great. Maybe I'll just build a little
Sure.
bit on that. Is it Yvonne in Brothers Karamazov who says in the end, you can expect very little from people? So, which is, I hear me out. I actually adore my job, gray though I may be. If your expectation is set only by your aspirations, you'll be disappointed along the way because of the nature of brokenness within a Christian community. There's a reason that the average tenure of a head of school in this little movement in which we find ourselves, if it is a movement, is 3 years. So I've been a headmaster now 12, but it's because of it's because of the grace of God, of course, informed by prayer, but with a constant remembrance that in the end, you need to have the kind of expectation from your families that is in keeping with what Scripture says to be true about the nature of brokenness, because you're providing some remedy, right, to the fall, not that of salvation itself, but of the darkened mind that comes. And so in penetrating darkness with the light of the gospel, which shines in the face of Jesus Christ, darkness kicks back. And often, of course, that's going to come through people. But you can't let the cynicism that comes from constant what can feel like personal attacks. I don't even know that they are in the end.
I don't. Yeah, I agree.
I think it's just people flailing, and in the end, God's love is still true for them in that moment. And it's okay. Bless and release them. Don't sweat it. Just bless and release them anyway.
I would, and so we were talking about this earlier, and I would say read Diary of a Country Priest.
Ooh.
Because here's someone doing the will of God and serving these people, and no one in the town appreciates what he's doing at all. I mean, he's a saint in their midst. Not that we're saints in their midst, but he's a saint in their midst. And they, so looking backwards, if he's a saint and was so misunderstood and so hated unnecessarily by people who thought they were loving Jesus and don't understand what this priest is doing for them, then how much more that those of us who aren't saints are going to feel like these are personal attacks when we're doing something good in their midst. And I think that those kinds of stories are the ones you need to build on. And if it's not literature, it needs to be the stories of those around you. It needs to be stories of those who are in the movement who can tell you, this is going to happen. It's going to be okay, but this is going to happen. You're going to get pushed back, and just keep doing the Lord's will.
That's great. That's a wonderful place to land. Thank you both so much.